Uh, I was born in Cape May, New Jersey. I spent several years in Lebanon attending Shwefat Academy when I was a young fellow. And what was I? I was about 18 or 17 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Many of us thought it was ridiculous that that war would not last more than 3 years. We hadn't any idea concerning the Japanese capability, their army, their discipline, all that sort of thing. Anyway, I had volunteered for the Free French when the war first started. And I met with de Gaulle's envoy in New York and indicated an interest. It turned out that the chap in New York had gone through Saint-Cyr, the French West Point, with a cousin of mine. So they recognized the name. And the British Council in New York was going to handle my passage to England. And I was alerted 4 times, and 4 times the alert was canceled because the U-boats were sinking everything in sight. And the situation with Britain was rather difficult. They had had a bad time at Dunkirk, and supplies were short. They were very dependent on the U.S. for armament and so forth. The 5th time, the boat made it to Halifax, and I was alerted, and I got up to Montreal with the idea of going to Halifax the next morning. While I was having breakfast, Countess Julie Tefalco, a very delightful, close friend of the family, rather elderly, though. She was 28 and I was only 18. Anyway, she walked into the dining room, and I got up and asked, "Julie, what are you doing here?" And she said, "Your father found out about this expedition of yours, and I'm here to take you home." And I said, "It was too late. I'm leaving for Halifax." And she said, "No, he's already contacted the CA, the French agent, and we're on our way home." So that killed that exercise. Then the next day, I went to the Army recruiting, and well, my life's ambition was to be a soldier, particularly in the cavalry, naturally. And I went to recruiting. I was recruited and sent to Fort Knox, where I had my basic training. What was interesting, the Captain Billingsley, who commanded the recruit area, had attended the University of Beirut. His uncle taught there, and Billingsley was familiar with my family in Lebanon. So it was an interesting sort of thing, but I had my basic training there. I attended Officers Candidate School. I left home the 10th of January, 1942, saddle shoes, a Harris Tweed sport jacket, and a Cavalier overcoat. And the 22nd of August, 1942, I returned home with boots, breeches, Sam Brown belt, saber chain, a 2nd Lieutenant, United States Cavalry. And my life's ambition was recognized at an early age. Apparently, it's been downhill since then. So there I am in the Army. My first assignment was with the 4th Armored Division, headquarters reconnaissance troop of the 37th Armored Regiment up at Pine Camp or Camp Drum, New York. And we went off on Tennessee and desert maneuvers. I was pulled out to go to gunnery school at Fort Knox. I was then, rather than joining my troop, I was sent to Bowling Air Force Base. The idea that I was going to be shipped to North Africa. I believe the United States was landing in North Africa, and they needed people that spoke Arabic. and I was lined up to go, but that was canceled at the last minute. And I was sent to a special intelligence camp, Camp Ritchie, Maryland. Met some interesting people. One was the Count Shuvalov, Peter Shuvalov of that family. The other was the Prince Peter Volkonsky, and his family, the one that written up the War and Peace, the book by Tolstoy. So I had 6 months training there, and then I was sent to the 23rd Cavalry Squadron of the 16th Armored Division, which was just forming. And I spent time there, of course, training. I commanded headquarters troop there as a second lieutenant. And then when I saw on the newsreel the Wax were landing in France, that did it. I went to headquarters and said, "Get me the hell out of here, join the war, train for the rest of my life." So I was sent to the 11th Cavalry, Camp Gordon, Georgia. I was the intelligence officer. That was a major's job. And I was there a short while when the 11th Cavalry Group was told to ship out a number of second and first lieutenants right away because the landing had taken place and the casualty rate was pretty high of these young officers. I volunteered, and even though the colonel tried to talk me out of it, I was sent up to New York, Pier 33 in Brooklyn, to get on a Norwegian freighter. We went to England, spent 2 nights at Tidworth Haunts. And the third night, or the third day, we went to Omaha Beach. We had to walk up the hill, but at least our baggage was taken up by truck. And the next morning, I was assigned to the 38th B Troop of the 38th Cavalry Squadron of the 101st Cavalry Group. That was the Jersey Essex Troop, a great National Guard outfit with outstanding polo players. So there I am in the war. The first night on the hill at Omaha, we were strafed. And I might add that I went over with a very close friend, a chap from Georgia who was in the 11th Cav with me. And he was an unreconstructed rebel. And at Fort Meade, where we had stopped for the night to get our combat gear and sidearms, they had a band to play us off. It was an all-officer train heading for the port. And I slipped off the train and handed the bandmaster $5 and said, "I want you to play Marching Through Georgia, but not until the train starts." And it started. They struck up Marching Through Georgia. And Melton got excited, pulled his 6-shooter, broke the window in the car, shooting up in the air, the damn Yankees. And at the time, the Army had called back to active duty many old colonels to sort of keep the peace. And this fellow came in, "Who fired those shots?" And Melton said, "I did, sir. The damn Yankees are playing Marching Through Georgia, and I don't appreciate it." And the colonel said, "Well, did you hit anyone?" "No, sir." "Why not?" And of course, the whole car, it was funny. Anyway, I'm now with the 38th Cavalry. I took over the 3rd Platoon. And we were spearing for the 4th Infantry when we were all stopped because we were getting close to Paris. And of course, headquarters decided that the 2nd French Armored Division under Leclerc would have the honor of taking over their big city of Paris. So everyone stopped. The American Army stopped. But from what I understand, the last minute, Shape headquarters wanted the Seine River bridges, and a troop of our squadron was ordered into town. Well, we never got to the bridges because the French were pulling our troops out of the armored cars and tanks, and they were so pleased to see us. And of course, we were delighted to see them, especially the ladies. And it took us 3 days to get everyone together again, and off we were to Germany and Luxembourg. And at the time, we were doing a great deal of reconnoitering. They would assign us to different divisions. Our communication capability was quite good. For instance, I had a platoon of 3 M8 armored cars with radios, 37 millimeter cannon, a 50 caliber machine gun, and a 30 caliber machine gun, 2 half tracks with 60 millimeter mortars, 4 Jeeps that were mounted 50 caliber machine guns on a mount, and I had a 30 caliber machine gun on the in front of me in my Jeep. So we were well armed, and our radios, of course, gave us access to the supporting artillery. And so our time was taken up reconnoitering and providing communications for different units, and a lot of dismounted patrolling also. Now, when I took over my platoon, I told my platoon sergeant for the first patrol that came up while I was there that I intended to lead that patrol, and the sergeant tried to explain to me that my position was in the middle of the patrol as a platoon commander, and I told him I quite well understood that. But I wanted to get some idea about what it was like to be a scout. And we started off, and I was carrying a submachine gun. I stepped into a fire lane in the woods, and there was a German soldier. We looked at each other. I stopped, and my platoon fanned out. And I noticed that he was raising his rifle. And my finger squeezed the trigger on my submachine gun. I didn't tell it to do that. Training told it. And I killed that first German. And my sergeant came up, and we checked his pockets to see if he had any maps or anything. And the thing that has stayed with me throughout the entire, all this time, I pulled out a picture of a woman and 2 little girls. And all I could think of at the time, my God, what have I done? I've killed this woman's husband and the father of these 2 young girls. What have I done? And it's odd. It's just one of these things. War brings things on like that. Now, this one I've never been able to get rid of. It's there. Unfortunately, as we went on, I was responsible for killing quite a few Germans, as they were responsible for killing quite a few of us also. So we continued through Belgium, and we were ordered up to the town of Monschau, which was on the Belgian-German border. And I was given 1,200 yards, responsibility for 1,200 yards, and we put in concertina wire and booby-trapped the wire. And I found a hunting lodge in the edge of the woods. We moved in. And at this period of time, this is November, and there was a lot of snow. When we would go out on these patrols, trudging through waist-deep snow, it was a bit nippy. But fortunately, we had a nice warm building to go back to, even though it was sitting on the Siegfried line. And every day the Germans would build shots, artillery at us. But for some reason, they spared the building. Maybe they didn't want to disturb our comfort. And one night, one of my lads came running in and he said, "Lieutenant, there are a bunch of paratroopers in the sky there, Junkers 88. And it was German paratroopers dropping. So we went out, and my 50s opened up, and the other lads with submachine guns or whatever. And what made it difficult for me, some of our lads captured several paratroopers, And it seemed that all the paratroopers were carrying a bottle of rum. And so my whole platoon wanted to go out to capture paratroopers. Well, we controlled it to some extent, but we were busy that night. Now, the main thing about it, this paratrooper group was commanded by the Baron von der Heid. And we at Monschau were 20 miles from Eupen, where Corps headquarters was. And the people at Corps were picking up some of the paratroopers. So that was a poorly handled operation on the part of the Germans, which was surprising because usually they had a good idea what they were doing. So I've given you a good start, I think, of how I got into the war. The next morning at 5:30 in the morning, all hell broke loose. And that was, at the time we didn't know it, but that was the start of the Battle of the Bulge. And we, when I say we, the American Army was completely surprised. They took us by surprise. They had brought in some divisions into the Ardennes just to give them a feel of combat, although there wasn't much combat other than patrolling, dismounted patrolling. But the artillery barrage was quite something. One of our divisions had 50% casualties the first day. That was one of the new divisions. Our front was penetrated, and our troop headquarters had quite a fight on their hands, but they were given some support. And we spent the rest of the week in that area. Incidentally, I might mention the infantry had a hell of a bad time in the sense, not only the artillery and so forth, but the cold, the weather. They have foxholes, it would snow, the snow would melt at a certain period of time. They're standing in water. That night, that water is frozen. They're in that foxhole. So there are many cases of trench foot. And somebody put out an order that all platoon leaders had to check the feet of their men. Well, with me, it was easy. We had vehicles, we could carry extra clothing, and also the lads never spent more than one night in the open. Down, we had two outposts in front of the building, and we had 4 50 caliber machine guns giving us a final protective line of fire, plus all of our mortars were centered and set up so that we held off pretty well. So, you all have any questions?
I'm going to let their teacher, Janice, could you field some questions? So again, students, you can either put the questions in the chat feature or raise your hand or just simply have a thumbs up for Mr. Shehab. Do you want them to call you Alfred or Mr. Shehab?
You want them to call you Alfred or Mr. Shehab?
It took me 21 years to make lieutenant colonel, so why don't you just...
Colonel. Yeah, yes.
I'm
Colonel.
a very modest individual.
Okay, so Lieutenant Colonel. Okay, yes, Colonel. Okay, Janice?
Thank you very much.
You don't have to call me lieutenant colonel, just colonel, that's enough. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Colonel. Who has the first question about the Colonel's life while he was there? Any combat questions? Hugo.
What was your first thought when the battle began?
What was your first thought when the battle began?
What the hell's happening? I had visions of getting a shower that morning there was a shower point not too far away. And I hate to admit it, but I got down there and started to shower at 5:30 in the morning. And all hell broke loose, as I mentioned. And my driver said, "I don't know what's going on, Lieutenant. We better get the hell out of here now." So at least I thought, well, if I get killed, at least I'll be nice and clean.
Well, I think I see Diego has a question.
Next question.
Diego, can you ask your question? Unmute yourself.
Yes. Did you ever thought that your life could finish in the battle?
Did you ever finish your life finished in the battle?
No, for this reason. Sometimes it seems that an officer has an advantage because when I would be called back to troop or squadron headquarters to get a new mission, I would get my mission, and going back to my platoon, I'm not thinking about I'm going to get killed or they're going to get killed or anything. I'm trying to figure, I'm working on how I'm going to accomplish that mission. What do I have to do? What men do I have to use for whatever it is? So my mind is fully occupied with the mission and no thought about getting killed. The only time I think it hit me that there's a possibility of getting killed, we had gotten into the town of Hammer, and the Germans opened up a huge barrage of artillery. My platoon sergeant who was next to me jumped into a ditch, and I stood by a tree. He said, "Lieutenant, you better get down here." I said, "Heck, no, I'm not getting down there. I just put on a clean pair of trousers. I don't want to get them muddy." And a piece of shrapnel cut my trousers, and what I ended up with was a red slash on my leg, no blood. And as a result of that, I decided to get it into the ditch with my sergeant. That was a close call. I had several other calls like other people. I was wounded once or twice, but that's part of the game. Sometimes after a particularly grueling patrol or something like that, when I'd get back, especially when we were sitting on the Siegfried line, I'd start to think about the mission and what we ran into. And I did have spasms of thoughts about being killed, but it didn't last long. We don't spend our time in the cavalry thinking about those things. Okay?
Yes, thank you. I think Teresa had a question. Teresa Lopez.
How did you feel after the battle?
How did you feel after that?
Well, it seems that when you go into a battle, it seems that each battle gives you a different type of feeling. It all depends on what you ran into, what you did. Did you suffer any casualties? Did you give any casualties to the enemy? And where were you? Were you in a rather pleasant place where you could get into a house? Or were you out in the open or out in the snow or whatever? So it all depended on each firefight, as we called it, when you would run into a firefight. What was interesting, the 2nd Ranger Battalion was attached to our squadron, so that every cavalry platoon had a platoon of Rangers. We were delighted to have them, and they were delighted to be with us because they didn't have to walk, they rode. I was happy about it because before that, if I ran into anything on a mounted patrol, I had to dismount a gunner, radio operator, or driver. I did not have a dismounted element. And with the Rangers there, I had a dismounted element, and the Ranger lieutenant and I got along quite well, and it worked out very well for us.
Thank you. Aranza, you had a question? Go ahead and unmute yourself.
How did you feel when you realized that you were going to spend Christmas in a fight?
Can you say that again, please?
What I mean is that, how did you feel when you realized that you were going to spend in a war instead of staying Christmas with your family?
Okay. How did you feel when you knew you were going off to war and that's what your mission was?
Well, while I was training in the States, I never considered going off to, yes, I knew I was going to war. That's what I'm there for. However, it never crossed my mind. When I was on a boat heading for England, I began to think about it. And when I was on a boat from England to Omaha Beach, I thought about it in a more thorough sense. What kind of a unit am I going to get to? What kind of commanding officers will I have? What kind of troops will I have? What am I getting into? I wasn't particularly worried. I was just curious at the time. The words, what am I getting into, really explains it. What am I getting into? And as it turned out, I was lucky. I had a good platoon. I had a good platoon sergeant, a fellow from Romney, West Virginia, MacDonald. I had a great troop commander, Joe Sane, Captain Joe Sane. And Bobby O'Brien, the squadron commander, was outstanding. We were lucky. The squadron commander and the exec, Charlie Rusek. Our squadron commander was always pushing us, but he was standing next to you when he was pushing you. He wasn't 20 miles behind at his headquarters. He was up there with you, getting you to get going. And I was lucky. I was lucky because I knew I was going to war. I knew there was a chance of being killed, although we all figured the other fellow's going to get it, not us. And I saw horrible sights. You know, people ask me, what is it like to go to war? The thing I never think about, because I don't permit myself to, is the stench of war, the stench of rotting bodies, the blood, the dismemberment of a body with arms and legs and so forth. And it's something, frankly, you don't dwell on because you'd go crazy. It's just, that's one of the horrible things about war, all these young people, and we were all young in those days. And
Miguel,
yes.
sorry, Miguel, did you have a question? I know I have about 5 or 6 more students that all have questions for you. Miguel, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
That's okay.
Yeah. How did you know when the war was over? How did you
They stopped shooting. We ended up in Czechoslovakia. I was running a troop. I was a troop commander by then. I found a chateau in the town of Dolny Lukovic, 10 miles south of Pilsen. our squadron headquarters was in Prestici, a couple of miles away. So I moved my troop into this chateau. We were there for 6 months. And, well, one thing, while we were still in Europe, in Germany, we went to the town of Torgau where we met the Bolsheviks, the Russians. And that was quite a meeting. We crossed the river because they invited us over to their side for a dinner, and they had taken tables out of every house in the village, and the tables were in the middle of the street. And of course, there's plenty of vodka and all that sort of thing. And behind every one of us was a female Russian soldier to see to it that we were comfortable, that we had the food was brought to us and all that sort of thing. And if you drank your vodka, more was poured in. So the initial meeting between our corps commander and the Russian corps commander was a very pleasant thing. From where I stood, everyone was smiling and there was music, and the Russians, of course, were singing and dancing, and I happen to be very fond of Russian music. So that was a real plus. Now, when we were in Czechoslovakia, everything was splendid. We exchanged visits with the Russians. Marlene Dietrich, an actress from Hollywood, came over and spent time with us, with B Troop of the 38th Squadron. And it was nice having her there. But when the Russians found out she was there, they insisted we invite them over to our little club that we had arranged, which we did. And I have a photo of our group commander, Marlene Dietrich, and the Russian commander. I hate to say it, he looked like a bloody barbarian, but anyway, he was smiling. So those periods of time were fine, and we were friendly with them until one time, this Cossack major that I'd become chummy with, we both spoke a little French, so we understood each other to a degree. He used to he was a big fellow. He'd pick me up and hug me and all that when we'd meet each time. They're very explosive in their meetings. But this one time, as he approached me, he stopped, bowed, and turned away. And what had happened, the political commissars had come back to the combat units. And then we started to have trouble with them. But prior to that, Bob Hope, one of the outstanding fellows from Hollywood, he was great. He was there with the Diamond Horseshoe Show, and there was a young lady there that I had dated in New York. So I had her out to the chateau for lunch. She enjoyed it. And there were 16 girls, and she said, "Why don't you bring them all out?" Which we did. And the day of the parade, where we had Russian, French, British, Dutch, American, all types of general officers and troops, I didn't have enough people to fill all my vehicles. So we had the 16 ladies. I put Helen in my armored car and told her, "You sit in the gunner's seat with a field jacket." We gave them a field jacket and a helmet. And we distributed them through the troop. And I told Helen, "Now when we go by the reviewing stand, I'll be standing saluted. You just sit there." But you know, sometimes you sense something. Helen had taken her helmet off. She's waving at the generals. Her hair is blowing in the breeze. And that night, my colonel said, "Alfred, you're lucky the war is over." Anyway.
Miguel, you also had a question.
Yes. How it was the next days after finishing the war for you in order to normalize your life?
How did you make your life normal after the war?
I really never thought about it in this sense. I always wanted to be a soldier, as I told you. And so I'm a soldier. I got home and I had met a young lady in Fort Smith, Arkansas, when I was stationed with the 23rd Cavalry. And she was attending Texas College for Women down in Denton. And we had maintained communication while I was overseas. And I was interested in getting her as a wife. The other officers in my troop were all married. I was just the only bachelor. And anyway, she was a lovely, charming, beautiful lady. And so I called her. Well, when I got home, I told my parents that I intended to go to Arkansas to see about getting married. My mother, who was from the mountains of Lebanon and very assertive, said, no, you can't do that. I once asked my father, I said, Dad, everything I've ever read and heard, the Arab man in his house is paramount. What happened? He said, well, your mother asserted herself rather early, and I saw no reason to contest it. And my mother again repeated that I could not go and get married. I finally asked her, I said, first of all, I'm out of diapers, and I intend doing this. Now, why can I not do it? And she informed me that when we were in Lebanon, when I was 10 years old, they made arrangements for me to marry a young lady from another family. And I said, you mean to tell me you have me lined up with some lady that I've never heard of, don't know, and I'm supposed to marry her? Out of the question. And my father, bless his heart, asserted himself. He said, Madam, the boy went to war, he came back alive. He said to me, call her. And I did. And we got married. I didn't have time to think about other than where am I going next? And that was the 18th Cavalry, Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, which was slated to go to Puerto Rico. And when I got back, I had to go back to Fort Knox, of course, and I was on orders to go to Germany. And at that time, this is after the war, you could not take your family with you. And General commanding Fort Knox had commanded the 4th Armored Division. He wanted to see anyone that had ever served in it. And of course, I ran up and called on him, and we chatted, and he asked questions. And I said, yes, sir, I've been married 2 weeks now, and I have my orders to go to Germany. He said, well, you know you can't take your wife. And I said, yes, sir. I explained to my wife that I'm married to the Army, and she's a camp follower, and she understands that. The next morning, my orders were changed to report to the 18th Cavalry, Camp Gruber, which was going to Puerto Rico, and the families were to follow. I thought that was rather nice. And from there, I stayed in the Army for 21 years. And I had some really fascinating assignments and so on.
That's a fantastic love story. Anna, do you have a question?
Yes. What did you miss the most while you were in the war?
What did you miss the most while you were in the war?
The comfort of a nice soft bed at night. Is that all right?
Yes.
That's a great answer. Alvaro, do you have a question?
Oh yes. Do you consider the experience of the war positive? And if so, could you go over it again?
Do you consider your wartime experience a positive one? And, what especially what made it so positive?
I considered it very positive, mainly because our country is at war now. There were two people, one in Japan, one in Germany. And they wanted to arrange for me to spend the rest of my life breaking rocks for them. And I don't believe in breaking rocks for a living. And it was necessary. My country was at war. As a citizen, I have an obligation. And that's why I enlisted. As I said, I got out after 21 years because the Army was beginning to change. It wasn't the Army that I loved and appreciated and understood. And also I was offered a nice job at the NASA space program, was just starting up. And so I retired and went to work at NASA. And the only problem, the regret that I have is Korea broke out in the early 50s. Now, by then I was in military intelligence. Military intelligence was not a branch of service as the cavalry, infantry, artillery, so forth. They borrowed people from the different branches. And so I was loaned to military intelligence for a couple of years. And when Korea broke, I put in to go overseas. I didn't hear anything for 3 months, and I called the adjutant. And he said, the colonel tore up your application to go overseas. And I said, well, he can't do that. He can recommend disapproval, but it's supposed to go on. And I want to go. All my buddies are going to Korea, and that's where I belong. I'm a combat trained officer. And the colonel sent for me, and he said, look, there are three of you, three captains at the White Plains Field Office. We're getting all these clearance requirements and so forth. I'm sending you three captains, 28 brand new agents, college graduates, basic training, and intelligence school. They don't know anything. I need you. And I said, I appreciate that, Colonel, but I'm a combat trained officer and I want to go. And I put in again. Then I got orders to go to Kathmandu as a UN observer. And just as I was getting ready to go there, my orders were changed to go to Saudi Arabia as armor advisor. We wanted to use Dhahran airfield in Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis needed a training mission. So I spent a year in Saudi Arabia, and since my family originally was from the Quraysh tribe, the tribe of the Prophet, my time there was quite interesting.
Wow. Guido, did you have a question?
Yes. How was the relationship with your partner? How was the relationship with your partners?
How was the relationship help me out?
With your partners?
The other soldiers?
Oh, how was your relationship with your soldiers? That's a good question.
It's a difficult question in this sense. As far as I know, we got along. There were some of them that I was rather proud of and happy with. And there were several of them I didn't have much use for. But you see, when the bulge broke, there were a number of soldiers AWOL in Paris. And they were all rounded up by
know what AWOL means?
Absent without leave. And also there were a number of soldiers in army prisons in England and in France. They were all told, come on, you have to go to war, and they were released and sent down to the troop units, and I received 2 of them. One of them was a bit of a problem. I had to court-martial him. The other one worked out beautifully. I think, well, I maintain contact with a number of the lads that I served with a number of the enlisted men in my platoon, Harrison, Sly, and the names go on and on. I was interested in their development coming in into the Army and as enlisted men. And I was an officer, and there was quite a difference between the two concerning responsibilities and so forth, the relationship between the two. But we were all geared on that during the period of time that we attended officer candidate school. To answer your question, I think I was lucky. I had a good group of people, and there may been a couple of them that didn't agree with me, but that's beside the point. I'm happy.
Well, Alfred, we have one question left, Lieutenant, and I just can't thank you enough for speaking to all of us and sharing your story.
He said they have one question left, but he was very happy that you were able to answer the questions today and participate in this video teleconference.
Lieutenant Colonel, I had one final question, and that is, I would like to know what you want the students to know about the time that you served in the war or the Battle of the Bulge.
We had 81,000 casualties in the Battle of the Bulge. That's a lot of people in 1 month. The Germans had 100,000 casualties. We lost 800 tanks. The Germans lost 800 tanks. They also lost 1,000 aircraft. We, today, most people have the opportunity for an education, and many of them get the education. And what I ask myself is, if we're educated and we understand things and understand history, past history and life, and so what the hell are we doing going to war? Why can't we sit down and discuss this sort of thing without killing each other? And I don't know the answer. Sometimes I ask God, are you looking down on what's going on? Why don't you put a stop to it? So it's, when you go to war, you go through bombed villages, homes destroyed, families destroyed. You see people on the road pushing a baby carriage full of whatever. You see young kids going into the garbage when you stop and your kitchen crew works up a meal for you, and young kids going into the garbage pails to get something to eat. You see this horror, this human horror. There's no reason for it. And I just don't understand why it continues in this day and age. This is not the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. We've been to the moon. We have satellites all over the place. We're going to go land on Mars pretty soon. We can do that. But we can't sit down and intelligently discuss the problems that we have without a gun in our pocket. Okay?
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel. We really appreciate your service to our country and
Thank
for
you.
talking with our students today.
Can our students all unmute their mic and say thank you to the lieutenant?
You're all very kind.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you greatly, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.